So last night I watched the movie Dave. Not to be confused with Meet Dave, a terrible movie starring Eddie Murphy. Not to be confused with another terrible movie starring Eddie Murphy, Imagine That. Which shouldn't be confused with All That, a sketch comedy kids show. Which shouldn't be confused with Sunny with a Chance, another sketch comedy kids show. Which should not be confused with Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, or its sequel for that matter. Which shouldn't be confused with The Godfather Part 2, which is said to be one of the greatest sequels ever made. Which should not be confused with Goodfellas, another gangster movie, this one starring Joe Pesci. Who should not be confused with Joe Piscopo, who was mentioned in a #1 hit song, which shouldn't be confused with Leonard Bernstein, the guy who played Beethoven's Ninth Symphony to celebrate the fall of the Berlin Wall, which does sound a little bit like Benny Hall, which shouldn't be confused with Benny Hill, the show that's famous for people running around in sped up footage like chickens with their heads cut off, which shouldn't be confused with the movie Chicken Run, in which the chickens are all trying to stop their heads from being cut off, which you should under no circumstances confuse with Chicken Little, a movie that contains both chickens, baseball, and extraterrestrials, which you shouldn't confuse with Angels in the Outfield, a movie in which something supernatural happens to a baseball-playing kid, which you shouldn't confuse with another low-budget kids movie, Kid in King Arthur's Court, in which a kid goes back in time and meets King Arthur, which should not be confused with Goosebumps number 27, A Night in Terror Tower, not to be confused with the ride at Disney, Twilight Zone's Tower of Terror, not to be confused with their Haunted Mansion ride, which shouldn't be confused with Luigi's Mansion, a game in the Mario series starring Luigi, which definitely should not be confused with Mario is Missing, an educational game on the Nintendo and Super Nintendo starring Luigi, which should not be confused with Captain Novolin, another educational game on the Super Nintendo, which you probably shouldn't confuse with Commander Keen, who definitely should not be confused with I Am Mean, which is what the animators did after they finished the Zelda games for the Philips CDI, which probably shouldn't be confused for Philips screwdrivers, which were designed by a man named Henry Phillips, who shouldn't be confused with Henry Ford or Michael Phillips, someone who should not be confused with Michael Phelps, an Olympic swimmer, who should not be confused with Poseidon, another Olympic swimmer, and his location should not be confused with Olympia, which is the capital of Washington, which should not be confused with George, who definitely shouldn't be confused with the King, and it's definitely a bad idea to confuse the King with the King, or the King for that matter, also known as Elvis, who you probably shouldn't confuse for Elvis Costello, who is actually not a member of Abbott and Costello, who are known to meet horror monsters like the Mummy or Dracula, not to be confused with Ed Wood, who met the actor behind Dracula, Bela Lugosi, whose life was recounted by Tim Burton, not to be confused with Edward Scissorhands, although I could see how one could make that mistake as both movies star Johnny Depp, not to be confused with Pirates of the Caribbean, which does have Johnny Depp but was not directed by Tim Burton, which shouldn't be confused with Big Fish, a movie that was directed by Tim Burton but does not star Johnny Depp, and Big Fish absolutely should not be confused with Big Mouth, which is the name of a fish, the big mouth bass, which you probably shouldn't confuse with bass guitar, which is an instrument that performs background instrumentations in songs, which you probably shouldn't confuse with the drums, an instrument that is often used for drum rolls, which are used to punctuate a punchline, not to be confused with sausage rolls, the punchline in the British parody song We Built This City on Sausage Rolls, which is a parody of We Built This City by the band Starship, not to be confused with Cobra Starship, the band who sung the theme for the film Snakes on a Plane, called Bring It, which should not be confused with the movie Bring It On, a movie about cheerleading released in the year 2000, which you should not confuse with Hey Mickey, a song about cheerleading released in 1981, written by Tony Basil, who also wrote the song Shopping from A to Z, which you probably shouldn't confuse with a skit from Sesame Street, which is an educational show aimed at preschool children and definitely has nothing to do with Electric Avenue, a heavily political song that probably shouldn't be confused with Electric Boogaloo, which is the subtitle to Breakin' 2, a movie about breakdancing which features iced tea, not to be confused with the beverage iced tea, of course, which is usually used as an alternative to lemonade, which shouldn't be confused with Gatorade, a beverage that does come in lemon flavor, which probably shouldn't be confused with the lemon-flavored drink 7-Up, which should not be confused with the game that school-age children play called 7-Up. You know, the one where that guy Dave constantly cheated and peeked when the lights were off? So bearing all that in mind, Dave is actually a pretty good movie. I liked it. 8 out of 10.